Okay, so we're diving straight in today, going deep on what went down on Tuesday, April 1st, 2025.
Big day in the news cycle.
It was, yeah, we had a Senate speech for the history books, and then down in Florida, some really interesting House special election results. So, yeah, a lot to unpack.
Absolutely. We've got some great sources to pull from, too. We've been digging into NPR's coverage of Senator Booker's marathon speech, and we've also got some insightful reporting from The Independent and ABC News on those Florida races.
And as always, what we're really trying to do for you is cut through the noise.
Right, exactly. We want to make sure you walk away understanding what really matters here. What are the key takeaways, and what might these events tell us about the bigger political landscape?
No jargon, no fluff, just the why.
Right to the point.
Okay, so let's start with this Senate speech. Cory Booker from New Jersey did something I don't think anyone has ever done before.
You're not kidding. He pulled off something truly extraordinary.
I heard 25 hours.
You heard right. He started speaking Monday evening and just kept going for over 25 hours straight, delivering one continuous speech on the Senate floor. Wrapped it up Tuesday evening.
I can't even imagine. Just the stamina alone.
It's hard to wrap your head around.
That had to be some kind of record, right?
It smashed the record. This speech blew past the previous record for the longest continuous speech in the Senate, a record that stood for 68 years.
Wow, 68 years.
The previous record was held by Strom Thurmond, who spoke for just over 24 hours back in 1957.
Wow. Okay, so we're talking about a genuinely historic moment.
Definitely. But beyond just the sheer length of time, what's really striking is the contrast in their motivations.
Right, because Thurmond's speech, that was a filibuster, wasn't it?
Exactly. He was trying to block the Civil Rights Act, actively trying to obstruct progress.
So a very different objective than what Booker was doing.
Yeah. Senator Chris Murphy actually pointed this out directly, highlighted this crucial difference. Emphasized that Booker's marathon speech wasn't about obstruction. It was about defending fundamental principles, taking a stand against what he sees as a blatant disregard for the rule of law by the current administration.
So it sounds like it's a very deliberate strategy, not just about talking for a long time, but really about using that time to make a statement.
Right, and that's an important distinction. Booker was leveraging the Senate floor for sustained public education and protest. It's a different approach than those obstructive filibusters of the past. Maybe a new chapter in how senators use their platform to voice dissent.
Fascinating. Okay, so what was it about this moment? What was so urgent for Senator Booker? What was the core message he was trying to convey?
Well, in his own words, he said this speech was addressing the, quote, agency, the crisis of the moment, end quote, posed by the Trump administration's policies. He brought up the legacy of the late Representative John Lewis, talked about the need to cause good trouble. It's clear he wanted to shine a very bright light on these concerns, keep them front and center for as long as possible.
And what were the main areas where he sees these problems? What did he actually talk about for all that time?
Oh, he covered a lot of ground. Immigration education, the economy, healthcare, Social Security, public education, free speech, you name it. Even touched on foreign policy. It was pretty wide-ranging.
Really ran the gamut.
And what stood out to me was how he incorporated the voices of others. He read letters he'd received from constituents, quoted public statements from world leaders. He really wove together a lot of different perspectives.
So it wasn't just a one-man show. He was amplifying a chorus of voices.
Exactly. And let's be honest, he wasn't exactly pulling punches when it came to who he was criticizing.
I imagine not.
President Trump, White House senior advisor Elon Musk, their administration's policies were all in his crosshairs. He accused them of displaying a complete disregard for the rule of law, the Constitution, and the needs of the American people. It was powerful stuff.
You mentioned earlier that a lot of people were watching this speech. So what kind of reaction did it get? How did people respond?
The level of engagement was remarkable. Over 115,000 people watched the live stream on YouTube alone. And when he finally finished speaking, the scene on the Senate floor was incredibly emotional. Fellow Democrats were cheering, some were crying. There were hugs all around for a very exhausted Senator Booker. It really highlighted how deeply people felt about what he did.
Yeah, that's a powerful image. Now, we keep talking about filibusters. Was this technically a filibuster?
Technically, no. Although long speeches like this are often associated with filibusters, which are used to block legislation or stall the confirmation of a nominee, Booker wasn't specifically targeting a bill or nomination that was up for a vote.
Right. It was more of a protest.
Right. And Senate rules generally allow a senator to speak for as long as they wish, once they're recognized, unless there are specific limitations in place. But the catch is they have to remain standing and they have to keep speaking continuously.
Which, for 25 hours, is unbelievable.
It's a feat of endurance, for sure.
How on earth did he keep the floor for that long without anyone else stepping in?
Well, he used a couple of strategies. Senator Murphy mentioned that a Senate page actually removed Booker's chair so he wouldn't be tempted to sit down.
Oh, that's clever.
But more importantly, he regularly allowed his Democratic colleagues to ask him questions.
Uh-huh. So he could take a break without losing the floor.
Exactly. You see, in the Senate, a senator can yield the floor for a question without actually giving up their speaking time. It's a clever loophole that let Booker catch his breath while technically remaining in control of the debate.
Smart move.
Yeah.
So who were some of the Democratic senators who participated in this way?
It was a pretty impressive lineup of support Senators Chris Murphy, Andy Kim, Peter Welch, Dick Durbin, Tammy Duckworth, Kirsten Gillibrand, Tina Smith, Amy Klobuchar, Ron Wyden, Raphael Warnock, Chris Coons, Mark Warner, Elizabeth Warren, Ed Markey, Chris Van Hollen, Angela Alsa Brooks, Maggie Hassan, and Ben Ray Lujan all engaged with Booker by asking him questions.
That's a lot of senators.
And their questions covered a range of topics that really aligned with Booker's main criticisms, stuff like Medicaid tariffs, national security, veterans affairs, agriculture, housing. It was a coordinated effort to really amplify his message.
Absolutely. It sounds like a real show of solidarity.
Yeah.
Were there any particular moments or exchanges that stand out from this marathon event?
Oh, a few moments that caught my attention. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer offered some powerful praise for Booker's commitment and specifically called out what he called the Trump DOGE Musk administration. DOGE being the Department of Government Efficiency, now headed by Elon Musk. He had some pretty strong words about their policies. And there was a more lighthearted exchange when Senator Klobuchar, who had quoted Bob Dylan earlier, asked Booker about his favorite musician from New Jersey.
Trying to stump him with a tough question.
Right, and Booker played it smart. He don't name a specific artist. And then later, Booker had a little fun with Senator Schumer, who's a big New York Giants fan. He reminded Schumer that the Giants actually play their home games in New Jersey.
I can just picture that.
Yeah, Booker ended it with a mock serious tone. Like, I still have the floor, guys.
Yeah.
It was a funny moment. I think those little human touches probably provided some much-needed levity during such a long and intense undertaking.
I bet. They must have been welcome breaks. Okay, so for context, you mentioned Senator Murphy's 15-hour speech on gun control. How does Booker's speech stack up against other famously long speeches in Senate history?
Well, Chris Murphy's speech after the Pulse nightclub shooting was a really powerful example of using extended debate to push for change. And then you have Republican Senator Ted Cruz, who spoke for over 21 hours back in 2013 opposing the Affordable Care Act. And Senator Rand Paul has held several shorter filibusters. But as we said, Booker's speech blew past all of those. He went longer than Strom Thurmond's record of 24 hours and 18 minutes. It's actually kind of fascinating to look back at how Thurmond managed to keep going for so long.
Yeah, I'm curious. What was his secret?
Reports from that time say he relied on things like diced pumpernickel and small sips of orange juice to keep his energy up. And apparently he had a whole plan worked out with staff in the cloakroom to avoid having to actually leave the Senate floor. It was a carefully orchestrated operation.
Wow. So this whole idea of holding the floor, it's really a big deal in the Senate. It's quite a tradition. Okay, let's shift gears now. Let's head down to Florida, where those House special elections took place. What happened there? What were the results?
So down in Florida, Republicans managed to hold on to both of the U.S. House seats that were up for grabs in those special elections on Tuesday. The races were in Florida's 6th and 1st congressional districts.
And remind me, why were those seats vacant in the first place?
Right. So these seats opened up because the Republican representatives who previously held them were tapped for positions in the Trump administration. Mike Waltz from the 6th district was chosen to be the national security advisor. And Matt Gaetz from the 1st district was initially nominated for attorney general, though he later withdrew his name from consideration.
Okay, right. So how did these special election wins affect the balance of power in the House? Did they shift the majority at all?
Well, these victories actually increased the Republican majority in the House. They now have 220 seats compared to the Democrats' 213.
So the Republicans are still in control, but by a pretty slim margin?
Exactly. It's a narrow majority, and that makes things really interesting because every vote counts. House Speaker Mike Johnson has very little wiggle room when it comes to passing legislation. We saw that play out recently when a procedural vote actually failed because some Republicans broke ranks and voted against it.
So in this kind of environment, a handful of votes can make or break a bill.
Absolutely. In a closely divided House like this, every single seat matters.
All right, let's zoom in on those races individually, starting with the 6th district where Randy Fine won. I heard that one was closer than expected.
That's right. It was an interesting race. Now, historically, the 6th district has been a Republican stronghold. Trump won it by a whopping 30 points back in 2024, and it was the same district that elected Ron DeSantis.
So you'd think it would be a safe bet for the Republican candidate.
You'd think so, but this special election was definitely more competitive than some folks anticipated. Fine ended up winning with 54% of the vote, while his Democratic challenger Josh Weil got 45%.
Okay, so still a win for Fine, but not by a landslide.
Exactly. And that 9-point margin for Fine is way smaller than Trump's 30-point win in the same district. It suggests that even in areas that are traditionally deep red, a powerful endorsement might not always be enough, especially when you have a strong local Democratic candidate and lots of financial backing on their side.
Right. It seems like local dynamics can sometimes override those national trends, at least to some degree.
Oh.
What do you think contributed to that closer than expected outcome in the 6th?
Well, a few factors probably played a role. Trump's endorsement of Fine definitely gave him a boost. And there was also significant financial support coming from Elon Musk channeled through his America PAC. On the Democratic side, Weil had endorsements from some big names like Senator Bernie Sanders, and the Democratic National Committee also poured resources into his campaign.
It sounds like both sides were really invested in this race.
Definitely. And interestingly enough, Weil actually outraised Fine by a pretty substantial amount. He brought in over $9 million compared to Fine's approximately $987,000. Although, to be fair, Fine did contribute $600,000 of his own money to his campaign, so it wasn't a total mismatch in terms of resources. And it's worth mentioning that Fine's campaign faced some scrutiny because of past comments he'd made about Democratic representatives Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib. Those comments definitely caused some controversy.
Okay, so that's a lot to consider for the 6th district. Now, what about the 1st district where Jimmy Patronis emerged victorious? Was that race as close as the 6th?
The 1st district wasn't predicted to be a nail-biter like the 6th, but the results were still a bit closer than some had anticipated. Patronis won with 57% of the vote, while the Democratic candidate Gay Vallimont got 42%.
Okay. And how does that compare to previous elections in that district?
Well, Patronis's 15-point margin of victory is actually smaller than Matt Gaetz's 32-point win in the district back in 2024.
So again, not a landslide, but a comfortable win for the Republican.
Yeah, that's a fair assessment.
What were the key dynamics at play in that 1st district race? What factors shaped the outcome?
Similar to the 6th district, Trump threw his support behind Patronis. He even held a telephone rally where he specifically praised Patronis's commitment to protecting Social Security and Medicare.
So that Trump endorsement likely played a role again.
I'd say so.
Yeah.
And another interesting parallel to the 6th district race, Valmont actually outraised Patronis in the 1st district. She raised around $6 million compared to Patronis's roughly $2 million.
Okay, so we've got this pattern emerging in both of these strongly Republican districts. The Republican candidates won, but by smaller margins than previous Republican victories. And in both cases, the Democratic candidate had a significant fundraising advantage. That's quite a trend. So what does all this mean? What are the broader implications of these special elections in Florida?
Well, these elections are being closely watched as an early test for both parties. They're giving us a glimpse into the current political landscape and how things might unfold in the future. Plus, we're seeing Democrats already looking ahead to the upcoming governor's race in Virginia. They're planning to really hammer home their message about potential job losses linked to some of Elon Musk's business decisions.
So those races will be important to watch.
Definitely. And on a side note, it's worth mentioning that Randy Fine's official swearing into the House has been delayed because the House actually adjourned for the week after that recent procedural vote failure we talked about earlier.
Oh, right. Yeah, those razor-thin margins can really throw a wrench in things.
You bet.
Okay, but circling back to those special election results, it seems significant that Fine underperformed in such a reliably Republican district. Does that tell us anything about the broader political mood? Are there any hints there about how people are feeling about the current administration?
It's definitely something to pay attention to. It could be a sign that there's some unease or shifting sentiment even within those traditionally Republican strongholds. And there are a few potential factors that might be contributing to that. The upcoming Liberation Day tariffs, for example, and there could be some public disapproval brewing over Musk's company's actions targeting government agencies. So these elections might be an early warning sign of a more complex and evolving political environment than we've seen in recent years.
Intriguing. Okay, so let's bring it all home. We've covered a lot of ground today. What are the big takeaways from these two seemingly separate events, this historic Senate speech and these surprising House race results?
Well, on one hand, we had Senator Booker's absolutely unprecedented speech in the Senate, a powerful and lengthy protest against the current administration's policies. It was a really striking example of the intensity of the resistance and the creative tactics being used to challenge the status quo.
Yeah, that was a marathon for the ages.
And then simultaneously down in Florida, while Republicans did hold on to both House seats in those special elections, the margins of victory were way closer than many expected, especially considering those districts' strong Republican leanings. And that, coupled with the fundraising success of the Democratic candidates, it suggested there might be some shifting political dynamics at play, perhaps some cracks appearing in what was once considered unwavering Republican support.
So the big aha moments for me are the historical significance and sheer scale of Senator Booker's protest, and then the unexpected competitiveness of those House races in Florida, despite the district's strong Republican lean and those fundraising advantages held by the Democratic candidates.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Those are the key points.
Yeah.
And what's really fascinating is that these two events, while happening in different branches of government and in different states, they both offer some intriguing insights into the current political climate and the undercurrents that might be shaping the future.
Right. It's like we're getting these little glimpses into a bigger story that's still unfolding. So I'm going to leave our listeners with a question to ponder. If we consider both of these events together, Senator Booker's speech and those close House races in Florida, what do they tell us about the current levels of enthusiasm for and opposition to the present administration? And maybe even more importantly, what could this foreshadow for future elections and the direction of policy debates? These seemingly isolated events, they might actually be interconnected threads in a much larger and evolving political narrative. It's something to think about.